Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 6th of November 2024, and I come to you today a somewhat humbled man. Of course, I refer to here my erroneous prediction made last night with a slight degree of confidence that it turned out to be wholly ill-deserved and very ill-founded, in that I predicted that the results of the US presidential election would be a Kamala Harris narrow victory. Well, only goes to show how wrong you could be. The actual result, of course, that has come through and actually came through and became clear very rapidly last night was that the polls had been off by by at least 4 percentage points in terms of being unfavorable to Trump. So final results when they came in, and again, votes are still being counted in some areas, but Trump's victory has been secured already. He already has 292 votes in the Electoral College compared to Kamala Harris's 224. He has 71,858,428 votes compared to 66,990,807 for Harris. So on Electoral College and popular votes, Trump has won. And Harris so far has gone into hiding and has not been seen. Again, repeating exactly the behavior of Hillary Clinton back in 2016, who never acknowledged her defeat, by the way, never publicly conceded. I mean, they all had a go at Trump for not doing so in 2020. But it's exactly the same way that Hillary Clinton behaved in 2016. And I suspect how Harris may behave now. Now, there may be some changes this time around as to how the Dems behave. But we'll come to that in just a moment. But Trump has won. He has won in a lot of the big areas he needed to deliver in. So with the majority of the votes counted in Georgia, but the process not complete, Trump leads 51 percentage points to 49. In Pennsylvania, he leads again 51 to 48. In Michigan, he leads 49 to 48. And this is with over 95% of the votes coming in. And this is information that I'm getting off the New York Times site. So by no means a Trump site. Wisconsin, he leads 49 to 48 with over 95% of the votes in. So the only places where Harris can conceivably stage some sort of comeback are Nevada and Arizona, and Trump's already got this pretty much in the bag. And interestingly enough, most of the media organizations, the bourgeois media organizations in the United States and in Britain, agreed with this and went along with it. There was no real controversy. Some of them looked surprised. Jake Tapper, that odious imperialist spokesman, looked aghast. But again, there was a lot of screaming and a lot of wailing from likes of MSNBC commentators like Joy Reid, etc. But the attitude of the ruling class this time round is a lot less apocalyptic and a lot less hysterical. The ruling class themselves, I mean, not their liberal servants in the press and in so-called civil society, for whom this day is only as bad as, the last time they weren't served a bacon and cheese organic scone at their particularly favorite brunch spot. So Trump wins, and we should, of course, address the errors that I made in making the prediction that I did in last night's live stream. So what was the basis upon which I was making that prediction? And what did I turn out to be wrong about? Now, I explained my reasoning last night that this was going to be, I thought, a situation where Harris, as a sort of generic Democrat, would be able to beat Trump, because I did not think that Trump had expanded his base sufficiently to win a victory and overcome the historic problem that the Republican Party had been having since 2004, or should we say at least 2004, which was that they were suffering from diminishing returns in national elections, so presidential elections, and that they were being consistently beaten by the Democrats in terms of the popular vote. We should remind ourselves here that Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary fucking Clinton in 2016. So now we were facing a situation where I was looking at the campaign again as a remote viewer and thinking that Trump wasn't really doing enough, to my eyes, to bring about like a drastic shift towards him in terms of votes, to overcome that, well, what appeared to be a long-term decline of the Republican electoral base. That prediction that I made based on that reasoning turns out to have been wrong. Trump has improved markedly on his performance in 2016, and he has, which I thought was going to be his high point, but turns out no. He's won 51% of the votes so far. He's brought in, as he rightly boasted of, a large number of votes from outside of what was his original base. He's expanded certainly his electoral base, and this has had a knock-on effect in terms of the popularity or electoral success, I should say, of the Republicans in the House and the Senate, both of which they now have won control of. So the Republicans now have a majority on the Supreme Court, they have the presidency, they have the House, they have the Senate. And hence the complete liberal, petty bourgeois liberal hysteria has therefore erupted. Now, the popularity of Trump, it seems, has increased in a lot of areas where if you were a liberal, you would find it completely baffling and completely beyond reason that he would get prominent endorsements from Muslim Americans, from a decent number of Arab Americans. But we should remember that a certain portion of the Arab American population did vote for George W. Bush and were voting for Republican candidates before the whole war on terror thing started. And with Trump peddling as many mixed messages as Harris, but leaning heavily in the later period of the campaign towards the idea that he was going to be the one who, I'm going to end the wars through strength, everybody. It's kind of a repeat of some of what he said in 2016. This was a message that appeared to be popular. But I think from what I can tell from the reading I've done today so far, the increased popularity of Trump does come down to a couple of things. One is the sheer unpopularity of the Democratic Party with an increasing number of voters. It turns out that Harris didn't improve all that much on the collapsing poll ratings that Biden was suffering from. Perhaps she did a little bit, but certainly not enough to reverse the decline. And the Democratic Party has become loathed and detested by an increasing number of people, an increasing number of American workers, and an increasing number in the American petty bourgeois as well. And these went to Trump for a variety of reasons. Trump portrayed himself quite successfully, it seems, as the change candidate, and the price was eventually paid by the Democratic Party via people either staying at home, voting for Jill Stein in some areas, or voting for Trump in some cases. The price was paid for their active support of the genocide in occupied Palestine. Now, it seems perverse that would benefit Trump, a man who said he'd go much further in backing Netanyahu. But of course, the people who are angriest about this, and rightly so, don't necessarily have to vote for Trump. They just don't have to vote for Harris. They could vote for Stein. Stein didn't do all that well in the end. Or they could just stay home. And in certain areas, this appears to have made the difference. The Democrats have paid a price. Harris, and by extension Biden and the whole Democratic Party, have paid a price for their backing of the genocide. And this leads to much screaming and bellowing from people who should really have their Twitter accounts taken away from them, because these may be used in evidence against them. But what it really revealed is of course, the extreme shallowness and narcissism of the liberal mind, of the American middle-class liberal mind, who's screaming about how all these people who want to make a point about the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration backing a genocide, have only destroyed their own cause, etc. No, this is nonsense logic or no logic. Trump may be promising to do all kinds of things, but of course he hasn't done them yet. He may be promising to back Netanyahu to the hilt. He may be promising this, that, or the other. But Biden has already done, and Harris has already been culpable for all of the crimes that have been committed against the Palestinians and the Lebanese people. And so even at the most basic level, the Democratic Party had to answer for their record. The liberals and the leftists still screaming that people should vote for Harris no matter what are essentially arguing that the Democratic Party should never face any consequences for any action it takes ever. That's what they're arguing for, because the bad orange Mussolini might come in and do most of what Biden has been doing already. I mean, when you think about it, what could Trump have done that Biden has not done already? What restraints has Biden put on Israel? The answer is none. And here we will, of course, need to explore this a little bit, because it's wrong just to see this as in the way that the Biden administration has tried to present it. And the liberals, of course, have seized upon the Biden administration's explanations about how he's frustrated with Netanyahu. Netanyahu's not playing ball and this and that and the other. Whereas in actual fact, the reality is, and this is a reality that is very well understood by the Palestinians, by Hezbollah and the Lebanese, by Iran, that the real struggle is to remove the influence of US imperialism, of which Israel is just one manifestation, just one particular manifestation. And it's a very violent, very brutal manifestation, but it is a means by which US imperialism seeks to keep its control over West Asia. And again, Hassan Nasrallah knew that. The Yahya Sinwar knew that. Ayatollah Khamenei and the others in the revolutionary leadership in Iran know that. And so if we're looking at the actions of Biden and Trump, Biden acted as what he was and what he is, which is an absolutely fanatically loyal servant of American imperialism. That's why he backs Israel 100%. It isn't because he's got a great love for the Jewish people or something like that. It's because he understands his role as being somebody whose job it is to defend the interests of a US imperialism. And that is what he has been doing in the backing of Israel. So how could Trump have acted any more enthusiastically in support of genocide than Biden has? I mean, people talk about, well, Trump will license a war on Iran. That may be where his instincts take him, but I don't think that is achievable. It was not achievable under Biden. If Biden had been told that it was achievable, then Biden would have done it. What he's been told quite clearly by, obviously, people in the American military is that a war in Iran is not achievable, that it's not, or it's achievable, but it's not winnable. It would likely be a disaster. Trump would be told the same thing. And no amount of money from Miriam Adelson is going to make Trump want to be on the losing end of a war with Iran, or any president, to be honest. Now, when it comes to that, Trump wouldn't have acted that much differently to Biden over the course of the last year. And he won't act that much differently to Biden when it comes to the upcoming problems. Israel and the US are still stuck in the same insoluble, intractable set of problems in West Asia. They can't defeat the resistance in Gaza or in Lebanon. They can't defeat Iran. Israel is falling apart. Israel is now locked in a major political crisis after Netanyahu fired Gallant yesterday. And now there's protests have re-emerged again on the streets. The US imperialists, more specifically the Biden faction, would still love to get rid of Netanyahu, but again, they can't because he's the only one inside that chaotic colonial political system who can pull together coalitions on a regular basis. So they're all still stuck with each other. So in terms of Trump on West Asia, I don't see how he can behave all that much differently to how Biden has behaved. He's enthusiastic about, so he says, securing Israel, but he'll be confronted with the same set of realities that Biden was and the same problems. And remember, Trump, when he was confronted with a potential war with Iran, suddenly backed away from it. He may end up doing the same thing now, but then again, so would Biden. So this argument from some that, oh, well, you have to vote for Harris because we can push Harris to the left, or we can push Harris on a ceasefire, etc. No, both of these characters, especially Harris, are ciphers for the interests of the American ruling class. And if the American ruling class's interests suddenly turn in the direction of securing some kind of settlement in occupied Palestine, then that is what Trump will pursue. And again, no matter how much money Adelson has paid him, ultimately he answers to the entire ruling class, just as Biden does. Now, other things that have emerged from the last 24 hours is that there's been confirmation that the ruling class themselves, I mean the actual members of it, so people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon infamy and Washington Post fame, immediately offered his congratulations to Trump. And goes to back up what Larry Fink said about this being an election where no matter who wins, they win. And Bezos, of course, has a lot of business with the Pentagon, gets a lot of contracts from them. He doesn't want to put that in danger by having a pissed off, petty Donald Trump going after him for whatever reason. So Bezos has proffered his congratulations, joining with Musk and the other American oligarchs in coming behind and joining the party for the new president. So it says to me that the ruling class, i.e. the actual ruling class, most of them were pretty relaxed about this election. This isn't the same as saying that their servants would be relaxed about it. Their servants are running around screaming and declaring it to be the end of the world. The ruling class themselves are a lot more laid back. They know that Trump's no conceivable threat to their interests, not really. They know ultimately they'll play ball no matter how much noise he makes. And they know ultimately that their control over both parties is as secure as it ever was. Now, as to the wider question as to what happens now. Well, now the Republicans have command of the House, the Senate, and of course they have their majority on the Supreme Court. They have the presidency. It'll be interesting to see what kind of legislative agenda Trump rolls out when it comes to domestic considerations. I imagine it'll be a real bun fight in the House and the Senate. We can expect to see perhaps some attempts at an industrial policy. But I think this will largely follow on from Biden's industrial policy, as I've said before. Now, as to what happens in Ukraine, that is, of course, a question which has preoccupied many. I don't think that Trump's going to suddenly turn around and announce that, you know what, Zelensky, you're a bad guy, naughty guy, all like cocaine. I haven't done so much cocaine myself since, like, disco was big. They will more than likely follow, again, a similar policy to that which Harris would have pursued, which is that they know that this game is over. Like the American ruling class, it's dawned on them that the game in Ukraine has been lost. Now it's about a settlement. And I think it's been about a settlement for quite some time. The problem that the Russians have is that the US doesn't want to acknowledge that it's in the process of negotiating anything. That's why they keep hiding behind Ukraine. So it enables those who have a vested interest in the war continuing. So, for instance, the hardliners inside the White House, the State Department, and the Department of Defense in the US, continuing to try and push the war forward. Same in London. In fact, most of London, most of the political system in Britain, is absolutely lined up behind the idea of keeping the war going at all costs. In reality, as I said yesterday, and I stick by this, I think the negotiations are going on quietly behind the scenes. It's just a matter of if an agreement can be reached which doesn't leave the current US administration looking like they lost. However, with the changeover in administration, it may be the point now will be reached where some in the US decide, well, if we get a settlement agreed, we can then just basically make sure it only comes in when Trump gets in, and we can blame the whole thing on him. And for Trump, he will want many of the same things. He won't want to admit that the US has lost here, but he will probably want to get himself out of it. The question is not whether he wants to get himself out of it. He probably does. The question has always been, well, is he capable of getting himself out of it? Is he going to appoint people who actually do want to get out of this mess? Or is he going to appoint the same bunch of hardline maniacs who make the situation worse or try to keep the war going? Who he picks for Department of Defense, for Secretary of State, and for his National Security Advisor, along with, of course, all the positions that flow from that, or who he puts in charge of appointing those lower but very important positions in the Pentagon and the State Department and the national security infrastructure. This will be crucial as to understanding, well, which way is he going to go? Is he going to try and draw this thing down, or is he basically just going to keep the Biden policy going, which is to try and spin it out? We will see. Does he bring in somebody like that old reactionary Douglas McGregor, who is a anti-communist and a reactionary, but who does believe in varying the policy somewhat? So we'll have to see how that works out in terms of Trump's appointments to key positions. Now, other controversies floating around today, then I'm going to turn here to merry old England, is that we were, of course, greeted by the extremely stupid sight of a tweet from 2017 from a certain David Lammy. If you're not familiar with who David Lammy is, he's the buffoonish expenses fiddler who is currently the British Foreign Secretary. He's our foreign minister. Now, in 2017, Lammy was pretending to be the big-time anti-racist campaigner. And so immediately upon Trump's election, and in early 2017, when Trump was scheduled to come to Britain on a state visit, Lammy was gesticulating wildly and posturing about how he was going to lead the crowds in opposition to Trump, who is a supporter of the KKK. Now, several years later, Lammy humbly offers his congratulations to President Trump. And of course, Lammy's former fan club, the Libs in Britain, all go apeshit and accuse him of being a sellout, which of course he is, but it's hilarious to watch. Kier Starmer, of course, having sent, according to some reports, 200 members of the Labour Party, staff members of the Labour Party, to assist with the Harris campaign, humbly bows his head and offers his congratulations to Trump. Which, of course, is absolutely hysterical that he's been put in that position. I mean, quite why he and his chief guru, Morgan McSweeney, thought that it would be a good idea to publicly go against Trump is anybody's guess. My speculation on this is that McSweeney and others looked at the polls that were favouring Harris and probably made some of the same erroneous assumptions that many of us did, which is that Trump didn't have the appeal anymore. He wasn't going to get over the line. So it was risk-free to send in a group of Labour Party volunteers to assist Harris. It only goes to show how wrong you can be. At least when I'm wrong, all I have to do is to self-criticize to you, the audience, the viewers and the listeners. Kier Starmer's mistake is probably going to cost him more than that. At least it's going to probably make him have to endure an extended humiliation session that Trump will inflict on him. He'll probably call him Keith over and over again. You know how that annoys him. So other more interesting or more important news is that the British institutional left responded immediately to Trump's election by declaring that they were going to hold a demonstration against him, saying that Trump was a racist and was unacceptable and was a fascist, etc. Now, I've made clear before just how much I think that this view is entirely erroneous, but to reiterate the point, the organisations in Britain, such as Stand Up to Racism, are stuck in completely institutional left thinking, I think. This is the way they responded to Trump in 2017, arguing that he was a fascist and a racist and needed to be opposed. And Trump continued in broad continuity with the policies of Obama, just with different aesthetics. Trump now continues along the same lines as the policies of Biden. Obama carried on the tradition of border militarization and migrant detention that he'd picked up from George W. Bush, who picked it up from Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton was not the original guy who militarized the border, but he certainly increased the amount of militarization on the border. And so when you got to the situation where you had the American libs crying about migrant detention facilities, only to have it pointed out to them that these were Obama's facilities. And now then Biden ran them and they were fine again, according to the liberals. And now Trump's back. These are unacceptable. So what you've actually got quite clearly, and this is a valuable moment of political education, is that when Trump is doing something, because he's aesthetically speaking, not what the Liberals want to see, and it is purely a question of aesthetics for them, the Liberals respond by screaming fascism. When the Democratic Party is doing it, the Liberals respond by shutting up and going away. Now, the policies when it comes to migration in the United States, as we have observed here before, are dreadful. You know, border militarization is designed to secure for U.S. capitalists, the U.S. capitalist class, a pliable and hyper exploitable workforce because they live in perpetual fear of being detained and being deported. That's the real purpose for this regime. That's the real purpose of having like ICE. It's the real purpose of having the migrant detention facilities, the imposition of terror upon a workforce. Again, that's what it's all about. And of course, the Liberals don't want to talk about that. They think that that's probably just fine. But when Trump does it, and Trump gives his reason for doing it, the Liberals are no longer able to hide because Trump sticking the boot in on migrants, of course, looks bad, looks worse. But in reality, he's just doing the same thing that previous administrations did. The Liberals just get upset because they're now caught up in negative aesthetics. And it's when you realize that like much of liberal politics in the United States and in Britain is about aesthetics. It's like Stand Up to Racism, this campaign, which is dominated by elements from the Trotskyites and the Labour Party, like has never held a demonstration against Labour Party racism, as far as I could see. It's never held a demonstration against the racism of previous Labour governments or this one. Never held a demonstration against the way in which the immigration question is manipulated by the Labour Party and has done for many, many years. It's all about Trump's a fascist or Farage is a fascist, etc., etc. Whereas in reality, both of those characters are just more, slightly more out there expressions of bourgeois rule, but not out there by that much. And this is, again, it comes back to the aesthetics question. As long as governments genuflect before like sacred words, as long as Kier Starmer, continues to take the knee, supposedly for Black Lives Matter, again, that's another complete joke. As long as he continues to genuflect and say that he's a committed anti-racist, then as long as he continues to speak the language of the equalities industry, then the people who make up that industry, the NGO workers, etc., the middle managers, the HR managers, those people who were in the Labour Party base will basically let him get away with anything. He could run the same migration policy as like, Nick Griffin and the BNP from back in the day. But as long as he was continuing to say, Starmer that is, that he was still a committed anti-racist and wanted nothing but equality for all, etc., etc., well, then the Liberals would continue to let him get away with it, which is really does show you what liberal politics are all about. It is all about aesthetics. And as long as they've got an aesthetic deniability, then they will let their parties of choice, their leaders of choice, get away with just about anything, which is another indictment of the kind of politics that not just the Liberals have, but the entire institutional left has. Thankfully, more people were responding to that call for a demonstration by saying a lot of the same kind of things that I've just said now, which is fundamentally ridiculous. Like Biden's been overseeing a genocide for a year, and there's been no calls by this official anti-racist organization for a demonstration against Biden. Trump comes in and does the same thing. Suddenly there needs to be a demonstration. It's ridiculous. So Biden consigns to history. Harris pushed into the dustbin of history. Apparently she still has not conceded, continuing the Hillary Clinton tradition now, as I said earlier. But now we get into the question of, like, well, where does oppositional energy go? Because oppositional energy in the first Trump administration all got absorbed by the Liberals. But immediately, straight out of the gate, that they were pushing all all the demonstrations towards basically aligning behind the Democratic Party. That was true from the moment that Trump got inaugurated in 2017. That there were any demonstration against him was just turned into a sort of a liberal support the Democrats fest. Now, Trump, of course, when he gets his agenda presented to him, because he won't be the one writing it, of course, will have to commit himself to a class war upon the American worker. Now, as to how that is waged is going to be an interesting question. Are they going to go about it in a smarter way? Or are they going to go on a full-on attack? These are questions which remain unanswered for now. But we can see from the conversations he's been having with Elon Musk, the open admiration for Javier Milei, the way in which some in Trump's coalition want to go. Now, Trump isn't presented here with a straightforward choice by any means, because he's won the popular vote. He's won a majority in quite an easy way, really, in the end. In terms of the numbers, it was all settled rather quickly. But he has got a coalition behind him, which he doesn't really have to pay much mind to it because he's not going to run again. But for the Republicans more generally, it presents some interesting questions. Like Trump's commitment to reindustrialization, how does that go across? I mean, the person who will be concerned with developing that policy, at least in part, will be like Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. Like, what do all his ideas come down to? Now, I have my suspicions about what they will turn into. I suspect that what they'll turn into is a series of basically like tech guy stuff based on rendering American labor more hyper exploitable, which is what we've said here before. And that will be their big answer. Now, that, of course, will... they hope that people will be desperate enough to take any old shit they come up with in terms of any job creation. But it's questionable as to how far they're even going to get with their industrial and reindustrialization plans, with their job creation plans. Because, again, the situation that I've described many times before in relation to the low investment rates from British capitalists applies to us, but only to a slightly lesser degree when it comes to US capitalists. Actual investment rates will remain suppressed and quite low. Again, better than in Britain, but not by much. So is Trump or Vance or whoever is in charge of writing these policies going to be people who are capable of trying to push the ruling class into doing things they don't want? I don't think that they will be, to be honest. I think what you'll get is a lot of noise and a lot of PR, but not a lot else. So we'll have to see about that. But I suspect that if anybody's expecting a great reindustrialization wave with Trump, they will be as disappointed as their equivalents were with Biden. Because neither have shown any capacity for overcoming the structural weaknesses of American imperialism. Now, to go back to the question of resistance, working class resistance will emerge because attacks on the working class will have to be conducted. The ruling class's interests demand it. And it is in all of our interests, so everybody who's a communist inside the United States and those in states that are closely aligned to it, that any resistance be pushed away from being absorbed by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, whatever it attaches itself to, such a cause will immediately become discredited because the Democratic Party is despised, and quite rightly so, as I've said before. And so any resistance that does emerge will have to be, and this I'm sure is something that American communists will aim for, to be at least organizing protests and strikes, etc., which are outside of the control of the Democratic Party. And for this, I think I have to re-emphasize a point about the Bernie movement, such as it was. Like, anybody still clinging on to Bernie Sanders at this stage is an absolute fool. But also anybody still preaching the idea that we can turn the Democratic Party to the left is selling a fraud. And this means that Sanders and Sandersism, whatever that actually constitutes, that, has to be shown the door in a decisive way. I think the comrades in the ACP do understand that. But I think it needs to be, the point needs to be made forcefully, just as it needs to be made here about Corbyn. There's still people saying, oh, Jeremy's going to come back, Jeremy's going to do something. No, Corbynism has turned into a gigantic trap for people, which is only really going to lead them into an absolute dead end. It has no capacity to go forward. It represented a certain breaking out of a certain amount of rebellion, a social democratic rebellion for a while, both here and in the United States. But now it's just a trap to ensnare people into making them believe that some kind of movement for socialism or social democracy or reform is even possible. Certainly isn't going to be so through the Democratic Party, certainly isn't going to be so through the American Congress, and certainly isn't going to be so through the British Parliament. Now, the next point is that the turning of the back on a social democracy, this process will be assisted in the United States, because what's already being said by like Democratic Party leaders is that, oh, well, we lost because we were too left wing, which is, I'm sure, what Trump will back them up in saying. We lost because we were too radical. We'd indulged these Bernieites, Bernicrats for far too long. And now we need to return to sort of Clinton era Democratic Party politics, which, by the way, it never really left. It never really left that. Now, here's why that is not possible to do. Clinton era Democratic Party politics, which of course was marked by very reactionary trends when it comes to so-called law and order policies, etc., which Biden was, of course, firmly enmeshed in. Now, the continuing assault on the Democratic Party's old base of the industrial working class throughout the 1990s, the Democratic Party backing NAFTA and backing further deindustrialization, for instance, that process was masked via the phony growth in the U.S. economy and growth in productivity that went on during the Clinton era. The Clinton era economic growth that all largely got destroyed in the 2008 crash was very unstable and very temporary, but it did enable a certain amount of optimism within maybe a bits of the labor aristocracy and the petty bourgeoisie who voted for Clinton in the 1990s. And now all of that's gone. Yes, you have growth in America, but even the Financial Times has pointed out that that growth is largely illusory. It's based on like various elements of state spending and stock manipulations, and it's not leading to any positive uptick for the real incomes of the working class, which have remained stagnant. So Clinton era Democratic Party politics, i.e., just ditching all the pretense at progressivism, the pretense at social democracy, and going back to like Clinton era politics, well, it's not going to lead to any kind of electoral success, because Clinton's whole era was based on that the growth that did exist at the time, and the optimism that did produce, or a certain degree of optimism that did produce, which again has all gone now. Now, Trump's very appearance on the scene in 2016 and his re-election now show that there's not a lot of optimism out there. What there is amongst huge elements of the working class that voted for Trump is a desire for some change, any kind of change, something to make it look as if those who are on the bridge of the ship of state, so to speak, are aware that there are problems and that these problems need to be addressed. Now, the Camala Harris campaign was, again, it was almost a carbon copy of the Hillary Clinton campaign. I mean, Hillary Clinton's response to Trump saying, "We're going to make America great again. It'll be so good. It'll be the greatest place in the world. It'll make so good. It'll make your head spin." His pitch in 2016 and now attracts a certain amount of workers, because at least Trump goes out there and say, "We're in a terrible situation. Joe Biden is an absolute disaster. Doesn't even know where he is." And Trump at least is acknowledging that there has been a fall, that there has been a collapse. Now, of course, none of his solutions mean anything, and he's not going to even do some of the more positive things that he was promising. But what is going on is that large numbers of people are just casting about, looking desperately for some kind of change to be offered. And the Democratic Party approach, which is to basically offer not even rhetorical change, not really, but to say basically everything's great as it is. And by the way, have you heard the latest inspiring speech from Liz Cheney about how she was nearly literally murdered and how Trump's very mean to her? And they wonder why this appeal didn't work. Now, come back to something that I was talking about the other day, about it's only around about 20% of the population in the United States that actually believes in that they are represented by American governmental institutions. Now, that I estimate will be the 20%. That 20% mark will be the 20% of the country that is the wealthiest part of the country. The wealthiest 20% still believe that democracy works, that the bourgeois democracy is delivering for them, because it largely is, much more than it is the rest of the population. And so when you look at, in class terms, the Democratic Party's campaign, what does it consist of? It consists of pandering to and playing up the concerns of the wealthiest part of the population. So like the uppermost layers of the petty bourgeoisie and the lower bourgeoisie. That's who's in that 20% bracket. And so the campaign, for the most part, is tailored overwhelmingly to them. Because if you look at the messaging that the Democrats came out with, yes, Harris mentioned price controls a couple of times, then immediately backed away from it. But most of their messaging has been based on, I mean, this is the messaging they send out across the whole 50 states, that they're defending democracy against the bad orange man. And they wonder why it didn't resonate. They wonder why, outside of these tiny islands of wealth that exist across the United States, or certainly in certain areas, they do exist, that this just didn't resonate at all. It's because you're going around with Liz Cheney talking about the sacredness of American institutions, when 80% of the population no longer feels like they have any representation in those institutions. And they wondered why this didn't work, even from the point of view of just cynical electoral calculus, like this plan was a disaster. But again, this is what they aimed for, and therefore this is what they got. What they got was large numbers of the working class turning on them, more of the working class not turning out for them. And now, of course, they'll start screaming and crying about how their lives are literally being endangered by Trump. Whereas, of course, most of the people tweeting that were probably quite well off, and they're the very last people that Donald Trump will be repressing. Donald Trump will be repressing the same people Joe Biden would have been repressing, which is, of course, the American working class. So this, of course, leads us to the question as to, well, return to the question of where do things go now? Now, as I said before, it would be a disaster if all opposition to Trump just got expressed purely through demonstrations that are run by the established American left and therefore pushed back towards the Democratic Party. The thing I would look at when it comes to Trump is that if Trump says, well, we're going to bring the jabs back and things like that, the American communists, I'm sure that this will be done, should say, okay, Mr. President, we agree. We want reindustrialization in the United States. And we see your plan. And here's why. We don't think your plan's going to work. That's the way to actually engage with Trump and the level of enthusiasm that he has tapped into, it seems, from certain elements in the working class. Working class wants reindustrialization. The working class, quite rightly, wants decent paying jobs. So the way to respond to that is say, yeah, absolutely, we want all of those things, but we don't think Trump is going to deliver on them for reasons A, B, and C. Not opposing Trump that way by pointing out the limitations of his program and the fact that he's not sincere about quite a lot of his program. Not that will be the way to oppose him, not by running around with the Democratic Party in Democratic Party aligned organizations and Democratic Party aligned demonstrations, screaming about how Trump's a racist, despite the fact that, that Trump was running against the legacy of a Democratic Party president in Biden, who started off his career as a friend to several people who were Southern Democrats and who were more than likely involved with the KKK. Again, Like letting opposition to Trump get monopolized by the Democratic Party would be a terrible, terrible decision. It's what most of the American left will do, though. It's what most of the British left is already trying to assist with, basically arguing that the genocide aesthetics would be better under Kamala. So the triumph of Trump is here. The next few years will be very, very interesting in terms of what goes on. The class war inside the United States cannot but heat up, because the crisis of American imperialism is only going to get worse. If this war in Ukraine is settled, even tacitly settled, everyone will be able to see that it's a US-led disaster, and it will lose the US more credibility on the global stage. Their ability to force and compel other countries to abide by their diktats is diminishing. The fear that Israel hopes to inspire people has long since gone. And again, Trump, whether he likes it or not, is going to come face to face with that reality. So the crisis of American imperialism continues. The struggle to push American imperialism out of Ukraine, then ultimately out of Europe, and also out of West Asia, is only going to intensify the crisis inside the United States itself, as their ability to extract super profits from hyper-exploiting various different areas of the world is slowly reduced. Now, what will Trump's move be? Will he try and focus on the continental United States in terms of his reindustrialization plans? Will he engage in imperialist adventures? I think it's more likely to be the latter, especially if he brings in some of the traditional sort of militarists, shall we say. I mean, Marco Rubio was speaking at his victory rally last night, for Christ's sake, so should tell you pretty clearly about where he's coming from there. And as to, I've addressed the errors that I made in the erroneous prediction, and I own those errors. But what I will say is, when it came to my characterization of the Republican and the Democratic parties last night on the stream, I stand by absolutely everything I said. I stand by everything I said about Trump. I really don't think he is going to be able to pilot his way out of a lot of these insoluble problems. He's not going to be the solution for reviving US capitalism, and he's not going to stop the wars either. The wars will continue because the position of American imperialism is under threat. Trump may try and withdraw bit by bit from the Ukraine war, but as I said earlier, that's something that I think Harris would have done anyway. He has to keep backing Israel, just the same way Biden would have done. They have to try and stage some sort of confrontation with China. This all may, of course, turn out to be a man waving a water pistol at his enemies, but Trump doesn't really have much choice but to pursue the further lines of confrontation. Again, the needs of the US ruling class make this a requirement. Trump doesn't really get a lot of choice, but even if he was inclined to fight back against this, he would find himself up against the same implacable machine that was there against him in his first term. So we will see how this shakes out. Now, this is a pre-recorded video today designed to address my errors from yesterday. I'll be back with you on a live stream tomorrow. It's a slightly shorter video today. And tomorrow we'll be doing a live stream with a friend and new collaborator with the program, Kit Clarenberg, who will be on the show at 3 p.m. tomorrow, British time, 4 p.m. continental European time. And we'll be discussing the election results in greater detail and the machinations of the British that went around the election results, or shall we say the election campaign. So please join me for that. Thanks to everybody who has watched this. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. And now I will bid you